thank you so much. Hopefully, some of you were able to see the video and get a sense of who AMPI is. My name is Zahra Beatty, and I am the Program and Partnerships Manager at the African Entrepreneur Prize Initiative. I'm from Ghana and dialing in from Accra. I'm so honored to be here today on this webinar organized by our anchor partner, Janngo Academy, and to share a little bit about AMPI and who we are. And hopefully from the video, you got some insights into what we stand for. But perhaps let me kick off by giving some insights into our story, which may also highlight why we're partnering with Janngo today to host these series of webinars. So AMPI is the Jack Ma Foundation's flagship philanthropic program in Africa. And it all started when Jack first visited Africa in 2017. During his trip, he met with several entrepreneurs and engaged with them and was really inspired by the entrepreneurial energy and potential he saw in the young people he met with. He also recognized many of the same barriers to economic development and entrepreneurship in Africa that existed in China when he founded Alibaba in 1999. And at the time Alibaba was founded, there were no electronic payments or logistics infrastructure like we have today. Jack heard young entrepreneurs describe similar challenges to those he faced, and he saw similar opportunities for them to create change. And so AMPI was born because Jack, during that trip, committed his part to inspire, train, and support entrepreneurs in Africa, build inclusive business models that can create jobs and economic opportunity for the continent. And for AMPI as an initiative, we have pledged that over the course of 10 years, the program will recognize 100 African entrepreneurs and commit to allocating 100 million over a 10-year period in grants funding, training programs, and supports for the broad African entrepreneur ecosystem. And today's webinar by our partner Janngo is an example of this support. We're looking to provide skills building opportunities to ensure that entrepreneurs are able to take their businesses to the next level. And as an organization, we aim to identify entrepreneurs who are courageous, who are bold, and who are creative. In short, we're looking for business heroes, individuals leveraging business to create impact and to build towards a more sustainable and inclusive world. And AMPI aims to give such entrepreneurs across Africa a platform to develop their talent and business ideas and to inspire others to pursue entrepreneurship. As such, our vision is that the 100 entrepreneurs that we identify over our 10-year program will inspire 10 million more. And our values, I think, provide some insights into who we are as an organization and what we're looking for. Firstly, we're inclusive, which means that we're age and sector agnostic. We're looking for heroes irrespective of what sector they're from and how old or young they are. We aim to be grassroots oriented. We work with a broad set of partners, such as Janngo, who help us to stay in tune with various local realities. And we also aim to attract entrepreneurs who are working at the grassroots level and creating change there. We're Pan-African. We're open to applicants from all 54 African countries. This year, we launched applications in English and French to ensure that our Francophone applicants are able to apply without any hindrance. And going forward, we'll also add other languages. In terms of how we work, we organize the Africa's Business Heroes Prize Competition and Show, as well as offer training, mentorship, and support. The competition consists of a 3-part process: an online application, video call interviews with our top 50, and semi-finale pitches with our top 20 to determine our top 10. The top 10 finalists then have the opportunity to compete in the grand finale, the Africa Business Heroes Pitch Competition and Show, that is broadcast online and across the continent via major television networks. And the finalists will compete for a share of $1.5 million in grant money. In addition to these funds, we aim to provide these entrepreneurs the opportunity to access a community of mentors and trainers who provide support. We organize trainings such as this webinar, and the finalists have the opportunity to visit Alibaba in Hangzhou to get the opportunity to do a deep dive into the digital economy and learn about Alibaba's journey and how digital models can be used to propel their businesses to the next stage. Now, you've heard a little bit about who we are, and you may be wondering what we're looking out for. So in short, our business founders must be of African origin. They must be citizens of an African country, or their parents or grandparents have had citizenship. Their businesses should be based in Africa, which means they're registered on the continent and operated in Africa, and should be post-idea stage. So we're looking for businesses that are at least 3 years old or more, and have revenue for over the course of their history for at least 3 years. But really importantly, we're looking for heroes. We're looking for entrepreneurs who are creating impact and who are creating, like I said, inclusive business models. And finally, in terms of our timeline, applications have already launched. They launched on the 6th of April, and they will close on the 9th of June. We will announce our top 50 in mid-July, and then our top 20 in early August. Our top 10 will be announced after a series of due diligence in mid-September, and they will then have the opportunity to pitch at the end of November. So applications are open. Like I said, we're looking for heroes, and I'm so excited that so many of you have joined this webinar, and I'm sure you'll have a great session with Fatoumata and Sebastien. They are leaders and experts in this field, and so I wish you all the best for this webinar and for the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zaha. That was a very insightful overview of, I think, the vision and mission of this prize. We are very honored at Janngo to partner with you guys. We've been supporting similar initiatives. It's the first time we find this level of expectations, of support, of caliber, and I think last year's edition speaks very highly of the quality of the competition itself. So today, basically, we will be running this webinar through a duo of Sebastien and myself. As a short matter of introduction, I'm Senegalese. I'm a former tech entrepreneur myself, as I was privileged to run Jumia as founder and CEO in Ivory Coast, then as a managing director in Nigeria, before taking over the management of the performance across Africa. So it was at peak more than 130 websites in 30 countries. More excitingly, I transitioned into a full-time investor a couple of years back and launched Janngo in a bit really to be able to support entrepreneurs like you in terms of funding, but also in terms of scale and market expansion. I will let maybe Sebastien introduce himself, and then I will give you maybe an overview of our content for today and the exciting insights hopefully we have gathered for you.
Many thanks, Fatoumata, and good afternoon, everyone. So first of all, I would like to thank Zara from the NPI and Antonia from the Janngo Academy for the invitation and for giving me the chance to share with you my experience. On my hand, so my name is Sebastien, I'm Mauritian, and prior to joining Janngo as general partner in charge of investment and fundraising, I spent amazing years within Jumia, raising over 700 million euros capital for African startups. And I've also got an experience in a listed company where I had the chance to work on a massive financial restructuring. And prior to those two great experiences, I've also worked within an investment bank, advising international clients and working on buy-side mandate executions. But now I will let Fatou tell you a few words about Janngo and what we are doing.
Thank you very much, Sebastien. So basically, because we want to save the bulk of the conversation for really sharing our insights on financial management during this crisis, we still wanted to give you a very brief and exhaustive overview of what we do and what is our mission. So basically, we are investors, both impact and venture capital investors. Our thesis is really to help startups that are leveraging technology to achieve both economic impact but also social returns across Africa. So basically we are Pan-African, so you can be from any African country. We are sector agnostic as well, so we look at any sectors in terms of opportunity, but with more strong focus, I would say, on tech and tech-enabled business models. We are also quite proud to be able to come quite early in the journey of entrepreneurs, because we deploy capital from seed stage and up to growth stage. So from 50 to 150K for seed to, let's say, 1 to 5 million euros tickets for venture and growth. And we also pride ourselves of really backing best and brightest entrepreneurs, including the ones that are today underserved by, let's say, traditional VCs. And for instance, last year, only 13% of the female entrepreneurs on the continent got access to funding. We know it's unfair. We know that actually African women are the most entrepreneurial in the entire world. And basically, we actually, you know, commit to invest up to 50% for proceeds into female entrepreneurs. So if you're a female entrepreneur also on this training and you can hear me, please make sure to apply also to African Business Heroes because you'll have great opportunities, and also to get a conversation with us in case you are looking for funding in the next few months. So that being said, maybe in addition to our investor hub that so many of you know already about, we also run capacity building trainings through Janngo Academy, and this webinar is a perfect illustration of the type of topics that we like to tackle, and also the level of expertise that the team is happy to share with you guys. So we will be running other webinars, as you know, so please make sure, for instance, to join Antonia soon if you want to hear more about marketing, growth hacking, and impact management for an African startup. But without further ado, because we have, I think, quite a lot of content to share today, maybe I can give you a broad idea of the structure of today's webinar. So first of all, we will be glad to have kind of an interactive format. So we will be sometimes asking you a question through a poll. So Sebastien will play soon the first poll. After that, we will really deep dive into the core of the topic today and see how and what we see as main impacts that are really enabling our entrepreneurs on the continent to thrive, with a really strong focus on the financial side of things. Then we will look at ways to mitigate these issues when it comes to financial management, working capital management, capturing sales, saving on cost. We'll try also to give you some tips and tricks about some opportunities for, let's say, COVID-related relief funding that are happening today on the ground. And then we will be very happy at the end of the webinar to take your questions. So you have a chat feature on this webinar, so feel free to use it and to share your question, and we will try to answer as many of them as possible during the Q&A session. One last point is you registered and shared your emails. So that's also a great way for us to be able to share any follow-up material because 1 hour or 1 hour and a half will never be enough to go into the level of depth some of you might need at the moment. So we'll be happy to share any follow-up materials. And of course, this is a recorded conversation. So all the slides that we are sharing with you, courtesy of Janngo and INPI, but also the live session itself, so are being recorded and will be available live after the training for you to be able to catch up if you have to run before the end or if you joined late. So without further ado, I will hand over to Sebastien for the first poll.
Exactly. So let's kick off this this exciting webinar with a first poll. So please don't be shy, and feel free to answer and share your answer with us. And that way we will make this webinar as interactive as possible. So I'm gonna launch the first poll, and the first poll is about, and the question is, have you implemented corrective actions for your company since the beginning of the coronavirus crisis? So normally there will be a pop-up displaying on your screen with a survey. Yeah. So wonderful. So about 80% of the participants answered yes. I mean, this outcome and result are not surprising to me because of three main reasons. So as a result of the virus outbreak, which basically could affect positively or negatively your activity and businesses. So here we listed on this slide the three main reasons, but I mean, other companies and can have additional reason, but here and based on our experience, Fatou and I within Jumia, and based also on the feedback on the market, and also based on what we are observing within your portfolio companies, here are the top 3 reasons. So the first one is a drop in business activities. So what we are observing in the market is that many companies are seeing, are seeing lower sales. Their sales are slowing down, and they are currently revising upwards or downwards their sales forecast and financial plans. This is the first reason. The second one is a disruption in the supply chain. Some companies are producing and manufacturing products with PCs coming from China or other countries. And basically, so because of the disruption of the supply chain, today they can't import PCs to manufacture their products. So this is the second reason. The third reason is a travel ban and cancel meetings. So many countries and companies have banned all non-essential travel. And now, for your companies or companies in general, so it's now challenging to close negotiation with prospective clients or to close your funding round with prospective investors. Those are the 3 main reasons. And to tackle the effect of those 3 main reasons, we compile 5 top priorities that Fatou will describe to you. Fatoumata, we're having issue to hear you.
In case of economic downturn. So these 5 key areas are basically: 1, the ability to adapt your business plan and your sales forecast to make sure to incorporate and to take into account the new customer behavior. I will come into more detail on this with some practical use cases and some things we have been benchmarking across the world in terms of trends and patterns. 2, it will be quite key, if you haven't done so already, to adapt your cost structure, being it your fixed or your variable cost structure. So here also we'll come back to the topic with very concrete examples. 3, it's quite important as well to adapt your team organization processes, both in terms of improving the level of productivity of your existing teams, hiring new teams in case you are actually the type of startups benefiting from the COVID, for instance, education technology, remote working, or even health technology. We'll also have a stronger look because as we shared earlier, we want to give you as many insights on the financial way of managing this crisis. So we'll give you some great KPIs to look at, and also just some tips and tricks to be able to manage your cash runway successfully. And also because we are all entrepreneurs, and you know that basically behind every challenge we see an opportunity. We'll also see that for some of us, this is actually an opportunity to capture new customer segments, or sometimes even new market opportunities. So maybe let's have a stronger look at basically the sales component of things. So when you look overall across the spectrum, there is no one size fits all in terms of what's happening due to the COVID outbreak. You see, for instance, some tech companies that are seeing a very, very strong increase of performance across sectors. So for instance, GSX, TechEdu, they are a technology-driven education company, and as you know, because of lockdowns happening in most countries, it's a context where homeschooling or online education is really poised for growth, both during the crisis but also afterwards, as consumers are shifting their behaviors. And here we see, for instance, a 54% stock performance on their business. It's the same for Sartorius, which is today a supplier of pharmaceutical and lab equipment. They are seeing a 26% increase in their activity because basically, as you know, there is a very strong need across the world to be able to supply quality medical equipment, and also to be able to make sure that labs have access to test kits. We see that even in the developed world, it's an issue. So it's not surprising that they are increasing their performance quite strongly. And more surprisingly, some consumer goods, such as baby diapers, you have seen in some countries even, some craziness about toilet papers, but some consumer goods categories are also showing us a very strong increase with plus 21%, for instance. But, basically what we see overall is actually that there are more losers on the very short run than winners, especially for businesses that are not able really to leverage technology to keep working. And for instance, as you can guess, with all the travel bans and country lockdowns that are quite drastic and that are poised actually likely to last for a couple more weeks, we have actually airline companies such as Delta Airline losing 60% of their stock performance. You have aerospace manufacturers such as Boeing losing more than 50% of their performance, and even advertising agency. One could think that advertising will not be so affected because you can do ads online, for instance, maybe, but because the main people that are buying ads are actually businesses, and businesses are, you will see through Sebastien point later on cost, they are cutting costs massively, and the first cost they cut is oftentimes marketing and advertising. So it's also an area which is very strongly affected by the downturn at the moment. And when we see also, the likelihood of startups globally in terms of revising their sales forecast before and after the COVID, what we see is a growth forecast of startups ecosystem globally was actually as plus 85% for 2020, taking 2019 as a baseline, so which is quite optimistic on the future. And today the sales forecasts that we see across the board are actually showing only plus 25% increase. But there is still something positive in that message, which is you want to be part of those that will still grow, because some people are actually fully declining and have to really adapt in a very drastic way. Some businesses will be actually potentially filing for bankruptcy, but hopefully through these webinars and also your agility and ability to be very nimble and adapt your business model to the markets, you will be part of people who will be able to grow despite these downturns. So there are two type of actions that we see at this stage that will be important for you. So if you're lucky enough to be part of the sectors and the business models benefiting of the growing environment, it's really important for you to be able to rework on your sales forecast, but taking different scenarios, because today basically you have certain countries that are very not so much affected, let's say, in terms of duration. So for instance, some countries did not even go into full lockdown. So here you can have a plan that is more short to mid-term. But for the rest, honestly, of countries and sectors, it's more a mid to long-term game, because economists are planning actually a recession. So here it's really important to be able to be forecast accordingly, because as you grow, you will also actually incur more cost, especially more variable cost, and it's really important to run your existing shareholders if you have raised money, or to run your business plan if you haven't raised money, to be able to make sure you can capture growth opportunities that are really profitable. And this is a very key word. Usually, as venture capitalists, Sebastien and myself will be looking for the 2 first years of a startup at very strong, growth and hyper growth pattern, because basically you want to show that you are poised for, product market fit that is fast, that is massive, and that is fast growing. That's really usually the signature of venture capital. However, because of the recession outlook also, but also because of the scarcity of liquidity, so capital is more scarce, we are more looking also at startups that are able to grow, yet driving profitable levers of growth. And some example can include, for instance, making sure that whatever you are spending on marketing, which is unpaid, is, for instance, shifted on free channels. And it's even more important if you are in a decreasing environment. It will be really something essential to be able to strive. And you have very, very strong opportunities to do free marketings from, great storytelling, from PR, from SEO, from affiliation that is driving, visits to your website at no cost, and only maybe you have only to spend when you really make a sale. So it's really something that is important to look at profitable growth in these troubled times. If you're in a decreasing environment, which is the case of majority of startups that are reaching out to us at the moment, we see a couple of actions that you can still take immediately in order to make sure that you realign your business and sales forecast. First of all, your channel mix and your sales channels mix is a very powerful tool. As I shared earlier, for also people in the growing environment, usually a tech startup will start with ads on Google and Facebook to be able to acquire customers in a very repeatable and fast growing and scalable way. While this can be interesting because you collect data points, because you can adapt, it's still money that you have to spend. So here we've seen several strategies working well, including for our portfolio. Some of them includes actually shifting your focus on retention and reactivation. So, telcos know very well that an existing customer is always actually better in terms of sales recurrency, and also, you don't spend twice the CAC to drive business and profitable business in comparison to a real new customer that you have to acquire. As a second dimension, as I highlighted earlier, is really to look at the free channels as much as possible. What we see in our portfolio is most of them are really under leveraging SEO, for instance, when it's basically free. You just have to optimize maybe the website content a little bit, the backlinks a little bit, and sometimes even the text structure, but it comes at really barely no cost. It's really important that you are able to drive this let's say free channels and growth hacking mindset for free channels. We also see a very strong sense of urgency on payment terms management. And here there are two ways. On the supply side of things, I will let Sebastien comment on that, on the focus on the cost side. But in the demand side of things, basically, if you are able as a company to have preferential payment terms and extended payment terms, it's quite important, because you know that most of your customers will be facing a cash crunch. As if you are not, of course, in a position to do it, then it's a good idea also to see if you can partner with, a third-party financing entities, so that they are able to do, for instance, factoring for them, or they are able to do some kind of emergency lending, so that your customers can still keep buying from you. And this is true especially for B2B customers. It's also important to be able to look at ways to find alternative vendor sourcing. As Sebastien shared earlier, the supply chains are really, really strongly disrupted. And this is across the board, from big to smaller countries. But we've seen that basically through global marketplaces, you are able to diversify your supply chain and vendor sourcing options. And on our end, for instance, we have been helping the African Center for Disease Control that is trying to build a platform that is a Pan-African one, to be able to help all African countries source medical supplies. And as you know, countries like the US, or for instance, all of Europe, they are bidding very high prices to get the mask, to get the test. So here we had to be very nimble and to look at really granular supplier mapping, and to also leverage our network to still be able to access the best vendors, to be able to help the African Center of Disease Control get these medical kits to the African countries that need it. So really vendor sourcing is key and critical for this sales for reforecasting activity. We've also seen something that is very important, which is related to trust. It's actually one of the most important components for you to succeed. It's already important business as usual. It's even more important in times of crisis. So if you are working, for instance, in the manufacturing industry, make sure to show how you are really respecting all the sanitary rules and requirements when you process. If you are doing, for instance, delivery, make sure that you put in place contactless and remote delivery. And this is really something also that circles back to the first comment, which is alternative sales channel. When you do things right, you are also entitled to communicate on it, and you'll be able to get some traction from local newspapers that are interested in stories of how African startups are really helping, the community at scale. And it's an opportunity, PR drive SEO and PR drive free sales and free visits. So it's actually, two-in-one action that is important for you to consider.
So as Fatou shared with you by way of introduction, so the second top priority is about adapting the variable costs of your company to your new top line and your new customer spend. And what we are observing in the market is that some companies are facing a spike in the demand, and they are now adapting their variable costs by hiring temporary workers. This is the case of Amazon, which decided to hire over 175,000 temporary workers. This is also the case of Walmart, which basically followed the same path as Amazon, and they decided to hire 150,000 temporary workers to answer to this increase in the demand. And this is also the case of Tesco, the UK retailer, who decided to hire over 20,000 people to supply and to be able to answer to this spike in the demand. But on the other hand, so what we're observing in the market is that some companies are not enjoying, a growth in the top line, and this is, I would say the opposite. And this is the case, for instance, for companies operating in the automotive industry or travel industries. Here on the slide, this is an example of Ford. So the US car manufacturer, which decided to suspend their payment of dividend to their shareholders and decided to stop the car production. And basically, they've done so to protect their cash flows and to gain in financial flexibility. Here is the summary of the action plan for adapting your variable cost to your new sales top line. So if your company is operating in a growing environment, what we would recommend is that you increase your variable costs to fulfill the growing customer spend and demand. So, and please be careful about, the trend and the time frame of this growth. So wonder very carefully in yourself whether this is short, mid, or long-term trend. But on the other hand, if your company is operating in a decreasing environment, so the first thing that we will recommend you is to delay the large purchases, the long-term purchase commitment, as well as your new hiring. The second action that we strongly recommend is that you try to assess your variable cost base, and you just evaluate that whether this variable cost is vital or not for your company. For instance, if you feel that some variable costs such as marketing, communication, or advertising are not vital, so try to cut them as much as possible to fit the new customer spend. So the third action that we strongly recommend is that your company should build more flexibility into your business expenses. So before the coronavirus, there was a kind of normal, but now during this economic downturn, there is a new normal, and you should be as much flexible as possible. And the thing is that if you are able, to reduce your variable cost and gain in flexibility, you will be able to scale down or up very quickly, and you will be able to adapt to the market. The last action, and finally the last one that we will recommend you, is that you convert your fixed costs into variable costs if feasible and when feasible, of course.
Thank you, Sebastien. When it comes to the third area that we wanted to deep dive on, it's really related to your own team productivity and making sure that you don't have, let's say, a disruption in your own functioning. We have seen in several occurrences market leaders that are, for instance, doing brick and mortar and online retail, having to shut down the brick and mortar outlets because of the coronavirus outbreak, and who would have expected them to be delivering their products through their online platforms. But we have at least one case of a very well-known, successful retail outlet that actually had an issue with their own teams being able to manage their logistic processes, and as a result, they had to shut down for almost 2 weeks. So it's really important that you take this seriously and make sure that you leverage all existing technology tools to be able to adapt to remote working. A good example of that is actually Zoom that we're using for the webinar. As I shared earlier, really video conferencing is, for instance, one of the B2B and B2B2C services that is having a huge uplift. And they started with 10 million in December to 200 million almost in March, and now off to 300 million. So multiplied by 30 times in less than a quarter. So it's really something important to have in mind.
Hello, Fatou?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Excellent. So you can move?
Yes.
So basically, after the opportunity to leverage tech tools, it's really important to be able also to leverage all channels to be able to deliver your service to your customers. So traditionally, we've been backing some startups that are actually marketplaces and that used to leverage the physical shops primarily, and maybe sometimes doing online marketing through the platforms we are backing. What we will advise here is to make sure that you identify all online sales channels that are available to you. For instance, you might know Shopify, so it's a very well-known enabler of e-commerce that is helping any people across the world. So you can be in Senegal, in Kenya, in Zimbabwe. You can set up an account, and through the account, you can make sure you have some business continuity. And it's really a very strong trend that we see that so there are two patterns. One is some companies that are really shifting part of their sales to omni-channel. Essentially, these are companies that are still having some type of activity offline. So for instance, if you are selling essential goods, such as grocery or diapers or hygiene products. But what we've seen across our portfolio is actually a very strong pivot on online channels to be able not only to do, as we said earlier, your remote management of your team, but also actually your marketing and your sales. And here we'll be very happy to share more examples of similar platforms with Benchmark, maybe in the follow-up email to this webinar. And maybe in a nutshell, two types of great learnings and action that you can add to the checklist. One is in the growing environment, automation will help you have a higher level of productivity and make sure that you can keep healthy unit economics. And there are several productivity tools, from Asana for product management, from Slack, from Strict to be able to manage CRM pipelines, from Zoom, for instance, to be able to keep in touch with your partners despite the travel bans. So you should really certainly leverage them. You also have some tools, of course, all the Google Suite, that is, that if you have, a very stronger level, let's say, of abilities, you can even use Google Data Studio to be able to automate some kind of, market insights and BI if you're not using it today. And of course, if you're in a growing environment, it's important to be able to make sure that you still staff your teams. You have platforms such as Angel.co that are global platforms that enable anyone to do several things. Number one is to hire team members. And there is an option when you hire and you add a new job post to be able, for instance, to add remote work possible. And two, it's also an interesting platform if you are trying to raise money at seed stage. And if you are in a decreasing environment, your first responsibility as a leader or a CEO or any C-level co-founder is to make sure that really you step up and you are here for your team. Because we spend time and we introduce there's a series of topics that should be in your priorities checklist that are on sales. but actually your first, let's say, focus should actually be your team, because basically without them you are not able to capture growth, and also because you can face attrition because of the scarcity of liquidity. So it's really a critical time to step up to make sure that you embody the mission, the vision, also to share visibility. And that's why, back to the first point, it's critical and it's essential to have new forecasts and to adapt your plan so that to give them visibility. And honesty is also very key, because sometimes you won't know whether it will be a short-term, middle-term, or long-term effect. And here our advice is really to work out different scenarios and to share them so that they are prepared and you have a contingency plan to be able to adapt, whether it is on, decreasing the cost structure, whether it is in having, part of them off your payroll and being, variable, for instance, consultant people to you until recovery come back and you can afford the full salaries. And hopefully you'll be able to benefit from, national relief initiatives. We'll come back to that later to be able to keep, of course, meeting all the salary needs of your full payroll. It's really important also to raise overall level of productivity. It can be seems very simple, but people like Sebastien and myself, for instance, we have been used to navigate through similar contexts. If I give you an example, I used to lead Jumia in Nigeria, for instance, in 2015. 2015, it's really similar to what is happening today in 2020, because in Nigeria at that time, we had a sanitary crisis. We had an Ebola outbreak. We had even political crisis because we had almost 1 month of shutdown because of elections in May. We also had actually a beginning of recession because Nigeria's economy is really strongly depending on oil, and we had oil prices collapsing again like 2020, and beginning of really devaluation of currency. So in that, if you look at this context, you'll say that, okay, Fatou and Seb, you are nice with your PowerPoint, but there is nothing I can do. And actually, it's the time frame where we actually have been the most nimble in adapting the business model, shifting from retail to marketplace, finding new ways to do channels, management, and offline acquisition. So for instance, through a network of agents, as opposed to just spending marketing online on Google and Facebook. And as a result, it's actually one of the fastest year in terms of growth, and a massive fundraise was possible in the beginning of 2016, when everyone thought that no investor will put money in Nigeria. So it's really, really possible. And this productivity is really part of, let's say, this game. And thirdly, you will find when you look really at your sales mix and customer mix, that some customers are at, let's say, cost center, short-term, mid-term, long-term. So this one, we don't say you are not taking care of them, but they are not maybe the strongest priority for you to focus your own attention and the attention of your sales and marketing team. You also find very high valued customers. For instance, here, when we looked at our portfolio, we realized that, we had, for instance, one portfolio company that is doing global supply chains, global logistics, and they have like two types of customers. They have B2C customers that are sending products every now and then based on, are they shopping online in a foreign country, or do they just want to ship something to their loved ones abroad? But looking at really the type of profit segmentation by customer, they are also able to see that they had very recurring patterns of people sending, so SMEs and corporates, sending, for instance, medical tests, or sending, for instance, really essential material. And here, basically, some tailor-made offers were able to be delivered to them. But this would have not been possible if basically the resources, so for instance, the sales team was not shifted and focusing primarily on high value added products or service or customers to be able to leverage and navigate through the crisis.
Yes, now let's discuss about the fourth top priority that we identify and we wanted to share with you today. So basically, one of the most key component of your cash flows is working capital. And this is true for many companies across the continent. So here is the formula of the working capital. So this is inventory that you have, plus the receivables from your clients, minus the payables from your suppliers. And basically, if you manage to decrease the inventory, decrease the receivables, and increase the payables, this means that you will free up cash from your working capital, and you will have more cash into your cash flows. So, but please be careful if we talk about payables, for instance. You can't destroy the great relationship that you have with your supplier, i.e., and meaning that you can't say to your suppliers that you will extend the payables and you will in the payment terms, and you will pay it, let's say, in 30 days instead of 30 days. So please keep in mind that everyone is suffering from the crisis, and the goal is rather being radical than is to have a great conversation with your suppliers. So just discuss with your suppliers. If your suppliers is a large company, maybe it will grant you some flexibilities regarding the payment terms, but discuss this in advance. And this is a bit the same for the receivables from your customers. Let's say that your customers are paying you with payment terms of 30 days. So tomorrow you can't say that you will reduce these payment terms to 2 days. So instead of destroying values and relationship that you build for years with your customer, just engage in a conversation with him and try to see what is feasible. And the last component of the working capital is actually inventory. And this one you can act on it. You can manage better your inventory. Today we are in a period of economic downturn. So what I would recommend is to have less stock and to invest less cash into inventory. Just be more flexible to fit the customer needs. Here, this is a summary of action and suggestion that we recommend to reforecast properly your cash runway in order to increase your financial independence. If your company is operating in a growing environment, what we strongly recommend is that you compute the weekly break-even sales for your business, and that way basically you will be able to adapt either to increase or to decrease your expenses based on the sales break-even that you computed. And on the other hand, if your company is operating in a decreasing environment, so please keep in mind, and this is very important, so in periods of economic downturn, cash is king. And you should build a cash buffer. This is, critical and crucial for the future. And as I mentioned earlier, so you should also explore new sources of working capital to overcome this difficult period. And the third action is also related to the previous slide about working capital, is that you should engage, a constructive conversation with your suppliers and your customers, and you should, renegotiate, if feasible, obviously, delayed payments. And finally, the last point, if you are, operating in a decreasing environment, is about, computing, weekly break-even sales. So really, you should follow very carefully your sales, every week, and you should adapt your costs to these sales. We are encouraging, great initiatives, across the continent, initiative aiming at supporting African entrepreneurs and companies. So we can mention, two great initiatives. So the first one comes from IMF, and the second one comes from World Bank, which pledged 2 billion for working capital solution for African companies. So maybe Fatou, you want to add a few words about the great initiative that we are observing across the continent?
Yeah, and more specifically on that, Sebastien, I would like to add some points. So what we try to do, and we'll be happy also to follow up through by email, because you shared it when you registered, is to compile available pools of capital or initiatives that are really specific to COVID that can really bring some relief to businesses. And when we were doing this research, we came across 3 types of initiatives. Some of them are global ones. So for instance, as you know, most important financial institutions that include IMF and World Bank are putting billions of dollars into the economies to make sure that we can weather the storm together. That being said, oftentimes this money goes through intermediaries. So for instance, we found quite effective to be able, based on your country, one of the 54 countries you are from in Africa or where you operate, if you go on the IMF website, you actually have a policy response to COVID page, for which every country you have everything available at national level. For instance, Senegal, for instance, they have almost a plan quite ambitious that is almost 7% of the GDP of the whole country, and it's a combination of SME loans. It's a combination of let's say funding to central banks for them to be able to cascade it at lower rates, at much lower rates. It's also a combination of specific funds. It's also a combination of payroll and benefits, social benefits management. And we've seen really several countries doing the same, not with the same, let's say, pool of capital available, of course, but at least it's a good point to start. As you know, the World Bank also have allocated funding globally, especially through working capital solutions. So we put the link here, and we'll make sure that we can share it to you also in our follow-up communication, for you to be able to see all the global initiatives that are also applicable for Africa. After the global initiative, we also came across some specific initiatives that are Pan-Africans, and here there are either public or private. Some examples include, in terms of public response, the African Development Bank. So they created, they issued what we call coronavirus bonds, and they created a facility, which is a $10 billion facility, as a package to be able to help the countries that are part of the African Union, which is almost all the 54 countries in Africa, to fight the coronavirus pandemic. Here, a strong pool is available to private sector, so it's more than $1 billion, but it's very unlikely that they display it and allocate it directly to you guys. So it's through a list of financial intermediaries that are being selected at the moment, but hopefully it will also help improve the access to funding into, let's say, startups and SMEs that are not necessarily banked or supported by VC or supported by traditional financial institutions. And we also try to find interesting initiatives that were private this time, to be able to give you, for instance, bridge funding, to be able to cover your very short-term needs, whether it is in a debt form or in an equity form. So there are several of them. Here we are highlighting 2 of them. So for instance, there is Vital Capital that is already operating in Kenya and Uganda. They are happy to look at opportunities in also Ghana, Congo, Côte d'Ivoire, Angola, and Senegal. And what they do is, if you are working on agri, on healthcare, on infrastructure, or education, you actually can reach out to them through their website, because they set up a dedicated vehicle for COVID response. It's the same for Enigma Ventures. They are based in South Africa, but they are able to support across Africa. That being said, it's a shorter pool of capital. It's $1 million, but still, if you are, for instance, at idea stage, or maybe not so much revenue making yet, so you are, let's say, very early stage, it's still interesting to be able to get access to smaller pool of capitals in terms of tens of thousands of dollars, and they could be a great fit for you. We have also came across other initiatives that are more regional, including, for instance, as a MasterCard Foundation. So today what they do is basically that they set up different types of initiatives. One is specific for Nigeria, and it's focusing on the key areas the foundation is already backing in Nigeria, that are agriculture, that are creative industry, including fashion, media, culture, but also including all the digital economy. So tech startups are eligible, and here, they have made announcements, and they are starting to get proposals. And what is interesting is, beyond equity and debt, because they are philanthropic partners, they are also able to come on board with also grants which is, you know, a pool of capital, which is, of course, very much needed if you are hit hard and you are not able, for instance, to reforecast your business plan and show that you have an opportunity to grow or hyper grow. Here, you'll be able at least to get access to some grants to be able to manage, you know, the next few months before you are able to get back to recovery and keep growing again. So this is not a limited list. We don't have enough time to highlight all of them. But what we propose is to maybe put them in one Google Sheet, one Excel, and to send it to those of you who have shared their emails when they registered, so that you can see maybe all the vetted opportunities that we have seen to get access to capital, just beyond, you know, what we see in the newspaper and general announcements. And in that regard, there is also a third type of capital available that we did not mention here because we will need 54 slides for that. It's a country-specific initiatives, whether they are private or actually public, as I said, with the ones that are on the IMF website. So here as well, we've seen, for instance, countries like South Africa or Kenya having very diverse relief initiatives that are, you know, not as strict as other countries that are limiting their support to, you know, financial institutions. So for instance, if you are today not eligible to a loan from a bank, then maybe you are not eligible to that. So to compensate that, we made sure to also find some initiatives that were really targeting or the economy overall, so including the informal economy. And we have found some of them in South Africa, for instance, and we'll be happy to share the list. Of course, it's not something that is, you know, it has to be a dynamic conversation. So there are also some websites that are starting to collect and that are updated by people like you and me, being it, you know, philanthropic, commercial or public investors, or sometimes even foundation that are putting live the initiative as much as they build and announce them. So we will also share one link, which is a platform that was built by Duke Institute and Duke University that is compiling a list of up-to-date funding available for this COVID response. And maybe one last word on this topic. So here we focused mainly on people that are really deploying capital to fight COVID. So if you are either affected by COVID, or if you are on sectors such as education or healthcare that are really, you know, even more essential through this crisis, it might be relevant. But you should not forget that some, you know, private investors, venture capital, business angel networks are still active despite the crisis. For instance, Orange, the telco, they have an arm, which is a venture capital arm called Orange Digital Ventures. Now it has been rebranded to Orange Ventures. They are still deploying capital despite the crisis, and they're even looking at sometimes doing secondary deals, which means even before, you know, your next fundraise. So, you know, all these, you know, concrete tips and tricks for you to be able to navigate the framework of capital opportunity will be made available to you. But keep in mind that, you know, your first source of funding, it's not your shareholder, an investor, you know, philanthropic, it's actually your customer. So that's why it was really important for us to start with how through your sales you can create profitable, scalable growth, because this will be your first way of getting cash into your business. And then, of course, if you are really facing very strong headwinds, it's important to be able to know about any kind of support and relief available to you.
Yeah, exactly. So now let's move on to the fifth priorities. And before, deep diving into this one, so I'm going to launch the second poll. So again, don't be shy and please participate. We count on your participation. So the second poll is, since the beginning of the crisis, so have you considered capturing new opportunities? So normally you should be able to see a pop-up with the poll. So Fatoumata, so about 88% of the participants answered yes to this question and this poll.
Yeah, I think it's not surprising as a result. It's really good. As I shared earlier, entrepreneurs, they actually find opportunities within some challenges. And of course, it's a very, very challenging environment for all of us. So basically, we also wanted to, give a stronger, maybe focus on some sectors that are thriving during this COVID outbreak. And we have seen also when you registered that some of you added some information about your sectors. So health tech, for instance, is really at the front line, as you know, of COVID outbreak. Here you have an example of LifeBank. So if you don't know LifeBank, you have to Google it, not only because they are doing this great initiative, but also because they were actually the winner of last year African Business Heroes competition. So it will be also just a good inspiration for you to have to know how to be successful. But basically they did two things. Their main market is Nigeria. So number one, and it's really something, you don't have to be a health tech startup to do it, right? So they built a national register with all critical medical documents available in the country, ventilators, ICU beds, respirators, and it's really something important, and that came at very low cost to them because it's gathering information, but it's really saving time. It's reducing information gap. It's reducing opacity and also pricing issues and disparities, and it's really as a result saving lives. So it's really something I would encourage you to look at whether or not you are a health tech platform. The second thing is more specific, of course, to their business model. So basically they were able to deploy mobile testing units. You know that the testing capacity is a huge parameter to be able to get back to recovery, whether through lifting the lockdowns or through just increasing the understanding of how fast the virus is spreading, to be able to allocate resources on the most affected areas. And here what they did is to really set up mobile testing centers to be able to test people, and they have been able to test more than 2,000 people already through this initiative. One other example, or let's say bulk of example, is really financial technologies. There are several things that are happening. It could be more, but it's still a good starting point. So M-Pesa, as you know, is the largest wallet, financial wallet, mobile financial wallet on the continent today. So they made sure that some peer-to-peer transactions that are essential for people to send money to their families were free for 3 months. And they also make sure to shift and to push and broaden their reach for online payments over cash, because it helps reduce the sanitary risk associated with manipulating cash. They also did something that was really important. In the fintech industry overall, there are oftentimes limits with such a payment platform. So they more than doubled today's limit to be able to do transactions. So if you're a fintech, this is really a concrete action you can take that can help drive your sales upward, that can help drive also the customer preference. And don't forget that customer will remember this kind of things that you did for them during the economic downturns, and will be most likely to be more loyal to your business when the crisis is over. Paga, for instance, in Nigeria, already expanded in several other countries, but they also did the same with free P2P transfers in all their networks. So it's kind of a huge potential impact because they have already 14 million customers, and they will also help people to send money to their bank accounts for free, up to 5,000 naira. And Yoko, that has been backed by Partech Africa or Orange Digital Ventures, for instance. So they are South African fintech. They also really pushed the contactless payment for all the point of sales they are working with today, and made sure they're actually doing beyond, let's say, an adaptation of their offering and sales offering. They're actually adapting their product offering, because they made available remote payment product to make sure that also they can help reduce the spread of the virus. So these are interesting examples. Why they are groundbreaking. We believe that there can be more of them. And for instance, today at institutional level, there is a very strong lobby on the fintech to make sure that the telcos, for instance, decrease or even reduce their commissions even more for instance, Orange Money, MTN Mobile Money. So far, some initiatives have been done, but at a local level. For instance, Orange in Sierra Leone is giving 5 gigabits of data to all healthcare workers and also waiving the fees for them to be able to remit money. But it's yet to be Pan-African, but it's still great to have at least one country leading by example to be able to show to other countries that it's still possible to make money later, but today it's important to support the ecosystem. Another sector that is on the front line of the response today of the COVID outbreak is logistics. As you know, we really have a poor infrastructure, but we also have very poor ways of matching supply and demand. And 2 months ago, when the outbreak started in Africa, we actually had only 2 countries that were fully equipped to do tests. These 2 countries were Senegal and South Africa. So it was really critical. So today, thanks to World Health Organization push, more countries have testing capacity, but it's still not enough. So what we've seen is one of our portfolio company called Gexport is actually a logistic marketplace. And today, as a response to the need of sending anywhere medical goods, they actually decided to waive all commissions on any type of shipments that include medical tests, medicines, medical supplies for the ecosystem to be able to really get a faster response in terms of healing people and slowing down the sanitary impact of the coronavirus spread. Something else that you can do if you can, of course, kind of afford it is, of course, maybe you are not in a position to put more money or more marketing, but it's interesting to see if part of your activities that you do can be adapted to help your community. So here it's an example of listed companies. So it's maybe something easier for them. So it's General Motors. So they are manufacturing 30,000 ventilators to help fight coronavirus pandemic. We see the same in France, for instance. There is a consortium of people like Air Liquide. They are building actually 10,000 ventilators, but here these are developed countries. So you can imagine how tough it is for actually African countries. And what's interesting is in African countries, these initiatives are not coming from the big listed companies because they are maybe sometimes not agile enough. They are coming from startups. In Tunisia, for instance, you have some engineers that have gathered to build, through a 3D printing machine, equipment to be able to connect masks to ventilators and donate it to hospitals. It's really something which is mainly brain power. Of course, they had to partner with a fab lab, but all the fab labs in Africa have materials to be doing 3D printing and hardware products. So this is really something that has been a breakthrough. Likewise, in Morocco, we have several startups, in Côte d'Ivoire as well, doing local masks that are really designed and sold on platforms that are online platforms to be able to get closer to customers. So it doesn't have to be that you are a listed companies with deep pockets to be able to really showcase your ability to really solve part of the COVID impacts across the spectrum. And I hope at least these African examples will be quite motivational to you to be able to take action as well. So in a nutshell, in terms of capturing new market opportunities, there are several things. Either you are part of the growing environment, so ed tech, education, med tech, productivity tools, or for instance, factoring services. Factoring services is the ability to, play a financial intermediary between someone who is expecting money through an invoice and the real payment terms. So of course, they are booming a lot. So if you are in these sectors, really the time is yours. You need to double down, of course, take into account all the previous advice that we gave on sales, on cost, on talent, etc. But it's really important for you to be able to tap into these business lines. And in all cases, you have to be, quite responsible and be useful to your community because they will remember it. And it can also drive impact because all these guys that will come maybe use your service for free are the best people later to start paying for it once they are used to leveraging your solutions. And if you are, in a decreasing environment, it's really important to be able to adapt your business model and for instance, to pivot it temporarily or permanently. It doesn't have to be, you restart from scratch or you do a pivot which is 360. So for instance, one example that we shared earlier is if you segment your customer base, you'll see some people that are still cost center, mid and long term, some people that are profit center already today, or that can be turned into profit center in case they come more often. So for instance, if you are doing B2B software as a service, you know that here the key ratio is, you know, the lifetime value. So how many times people come and how much they spend every time, divided by your cost of acquisition, so by your CAC. So of course, if you get someone that you already acquired to come more often, it's a very profitable customer. And likewise, if you see that today you are operating in some sectors, in terms of, you know, for instance, logistics that are today not profitable at order level, it's also important to have this segmentation to be able to focus more effort on the profitable orders, or and less on the, you know, on the one that are really heavily driven by marketing spend. And in all cases, even though you are struggling, we are all in this together and we are all struggling. So try also to find ways to be useful to your community and drive impact positively. There are so many examples. I mentioned the one, for instance, which is a consortium of EcoNet, IMF, African Development Bank, and the African Center of Disease Control, where we are trying to get as many medical supplies in African countries as possible. And we are actually building a platform as we speak. It's not something that is, you know, let's say money or immediate, profit to any of our portfolio companies, but it's something that will, of course, I think, drive an impact in terms of health, in terms of ability to also recover faster, both socially and economically, and it's also something everyone will remember when the crisis is over. So again, it's a safe bet, and it's also a responsibility from entrepreneurs, I guess.
Now let's focus on the value creation, and from a financial standpoint, there is a very easy way to compute the value creation for your shareholders and your debt holders. So basically, you will have to derive two ratios. So on the liability side of your balance sheet, if we look at the right side of this slide, invested capital. So basically, so your equity shareholders finance your business as well as the debt holders. And based on the cost of equity and the cost of debt, so you can derive and compute the weighted average cost of capital. And now looking on the left side of the slide, so capital employed. So on your balance sheet, so on the asset side, you find the fixed asset and the working capital. Those are the two components of capital employed that you use to run your business. And based on that, so you can derive the return on capital employed. And if you manage to have a return on capital employed, which is higher than your weighted average cost of capital, this will mean that you still create value for your equity shareholders. Now I will pass it over to you, Fatou, for the wrap up.
Yes, so, you know, at some point, I think you've seen African Union Special Envoy Tidiane Time speak a lot about it recently. And people also that are in the INPA ecosystem, such as Fred Swaniker, it's called situational leadership. So this is one of the times where the situation is really driving and really highlighting the best and the worst in all of us. And as entrepreneurs, it's really important to act as a leader and lead by example, to keep being inspired, because despite it's an economic downturn, you can actually leverage some of the opportunities we mentioned earlier to be stronger, or at least make sure that you scale down in a good way and, you know, manage your cash flow to be able to survive and overcome the crisis. So it's really important that at the end of the webinar, in the next days, as we digest the content we share and that we will be sharing also on other platforms, that you have a clear answer on the question, what are the decisions that you are planning to make right now to overcome the crisis? And it's really something that you can compare to what decisions, of course, you had planned before to make. If you have raised money, it will be important to update your shareholders and your backers on the shift, or at least actualization of your strategy. If you haven't, it will be your North Star, and it will be really the way to pilot and navigate through that crisis. And to make sure that, you know, you capture that in a way that is easy also to digest, what we'll do is through our follow-up email, we'll add two things. Number one is the list of all available pool of capital that we have seen, of course, available to African startups. Otherwise, it will not be so useful to you. And the second thing is really an example of checklist, of Excel checklist, that take into account all the main insights that we share today, that you can use a bit like a PMO. So you'll have the checklist of actions. Of course, you decide if it makes sense for you. A good way to decide it is to look at, how feasible it is for you and how impactful it will be for you. And based on this prioritization, then you start really being in action and not in, strategy planning. So you have ETA, an owner, and it really drives the shift. And that's why leadership is so critical. We have seen people being able to build products in 1 week, in 2 weeks. We also have seen people filing for bankruptcy, and you want to be part of the first and not of the latter. So now, if that makes sense, we'll be very happy to take your questions for a series of Q&A. We already have some exciting questions that we can start with. But before starting the Q&A, we had maybe one last poll, which is an interactive, in case you already have ideas immediately, but of course you can feel free to think more about your ideas after the webinar. So what will you implement as further corrective actions for your company? Not next month, not next year, not next week, but tomorrow. So it's really something interesting. We love to hear from you. And also based on this early feedback, it will help us see in which areas we can follow up with more content, insights, tips, tricks, and also just, emotional support to you guys.
Exactly. So the vote is open and the participants are currently voting. So about 90% of the participants answered yes.
Okay, excellent. Let's get started. That's the right mindset. Great. So time for Q&A. I will start with the first question that we have. And of course, if we are able to keep the conversation open through other forums, on Medium, or for instance, it will be a great thing as well. The first question that we get is how a startup, which was growing in terms of lead acquisition before the crisis, could continue to acquire new customers in this hard time, especially when customers don't answer present anymore. So it's an interesting question because it's actually related to several aspects that we spoke about earlier. So number one, you need to understand, in which sectors you are and if you are really, let's say, hit, or if you are able to leverage the crisis. If I give you an example, even Amazon, they see some categories that are growing very, very strongly. So for instance, diapers, sports equipment at home, grocery, of course, but they also have some, categories like everything which is related to outdoor activities that is decreasing. So you need to be quite granular in understanding, is it a favorable seasonality for you, or is it actually very not favorable? If it is, then the second question is which type of channels are more effective to drive acquisition with a minimal investment or with no investment. Here, what we shared earlier is if you are a tech startup, you have several things that you can leverage. One is, you can leverage your CRM, so your email database, to be able to reactivate your former customers to come more often and increase their lifetime value. Two, SEO. So what we see across our portfolio is very few, and also our deal flow, by the way, is very few tech startups, and it's very paradoxical, are great in SEO in Africa, which is paradoxical because SEO is free. SEO is search engine optimization. It means you just need to basically understand what are the keywords related to your activity and make sure that when Google is, scrolling through your website, they find them to be able to put you in first, second, or third position so that you get free visits and free traffic. So this is more relevant if you are online platform. If you are an offline platform, then what will be important, or if you have mainly offline customers, is to think of ways to get acquisition, so marketing or sales, that are not fixed but variable, and that are also sometimes outsourced. One example is I shared earlier, for instance, that in 2015, we struggled because of the recession, the Ebola, and the elections in Nigeria. But that's the time exactly where we grew our network of sales agents from a few hundreds to almost 45,000 people in Nigeria. And what is interesting with, for instance, a sales agent network is you have partners that you pay on a commission basis, which means if they don't bring sales, you don't have costs, right? So it's really something that if they bring sales, everyone is happy because you grow in terms of top line and they earn a commission. But if it's not working, you are not spending, right? So it's not on your fixed payroll. So you really have to look at this channel mix based on are you online, offline, or hybrid to be able to adapt more specifically. Another question is, in this COVID context, how can I convince new talents to work with me before earning money? So, you know, this question is very true even outside COVID, in the sense that, especially when you are early stage, it's very unlikely that you just come with an idea and you have money, right? So even if you bootstrap, it can only keep you up and running for a couple of weeks, months, and years if you are really lucky. Which means that even when it's not a situation of crisis, you should be able, and it's actually something that VC assess, which is if you are able to convince people to come and work for you, is actually a sign of will you be able to make it. And some tips include really being mission driven. We have a generation of entrepreneurs, and basically most of our investees are part of this mindset because we are also impact investors that are really dedicated on, of course, making money because, you know, we are for-profit businesses, but also making an impact. It doesn't mean that you have to focus on healthcare education to make an impact. You know, even the fact that you operate in Africa as a startup, you are creating jobs, hence you are making an impact. So these are some key, you know, messages that you can leverage. When you hire a CTO, you can tell him, hey, maybe I can pay you for 6 months. But of course, there are several things. One is a mission. Two is, I have a plan. Back to the point we raised earlier about reforecasting. And after this plan, in 6 months or in 1 year, we'll get to product market fit. Here, not only I'll be able to compensate and pay you because we'll be able to raise money, or I will be able to, for instance, give you part of, you know, stock ownership. So, for instance, sharing your stock ownership, so creating stock options will be something that will be helping someone that is not making maybe a fixed salary that is high to come and work for you. And here you have to be fair and see what is possible. Don't oversell. So if you don't know if you'll be able to get to product market fit by 1-2 years or raise money, you can mention it as an option, but of course you can't promise anything before you actually deliver it. And it's really important to keep your word on such important things. And actually, you also have in mind that the context is not good employment-wise for so many other great talent across the world, whether in developed or emerging countries that are getting actually, you know, that are collaterals, victims of, you know, right sizing or downsizing plans. So basically they are laid off. So you actually have paradoxically a very higher availability of talent right now. So question 3 is, we have mentioned the company which can assist in online sales. What is the name of the company? So here maybe to clarify, there are again 2 situations. So you are selling a physical good. In that case, you might have already existing marketplaces, such as, for instance, I don't know, Jumia, Takealot, you know, these online platforms where you can basically keep selling because these guys, they still have the authorization to keep delivering. So you are still getting your money in. And that's an option. If you're not delivering physical goods, you can still do online marketing. And here there are again several dimensions. Number 1 is you can leverage, you know, some channels such as affiliation, Google, Facebook. You know, for some of you who are a bit more advanced in marketing, for instance, retargeting. And this type of channels are 100% online, so you don't have to go and spend for radio, newspaper ad or anything offline, but they are actually still working because people are connected because they are in lockdown. So they are still driving awareness, consideration, sometimes purchase and conversion, and sometimes even reactivation. But I will not say too much about it because it's actually the topic of a webinar that Antonia will run. So make sure to stay tuned on the webinar about online growth hacking, because we will actually share concrete examples of tips and tricks you can leverage to do online acquisition online. There is also a question about, is there some specific funds for telemedicine startups with social projects and social impacts. So here you might be part of the lucky ones, because several initiatives that we've seen that we started sharing orally and we share more through email are actually related to the health sector. So just to name a few, for instance, a MasterCard Foundation has a program available for COVID response that includes, as I said, grants, which are targeted at telemedicine. They go beyond health, but health is part of it. Skull Foundation as well, so they take applicants for all the wards. I actually have seen that they already started allocated capital to some projects in Africa, and because they are a foundation, it's mainly grants for the time being. So those are two great examples for you. But don't forget to also check back the presentation when we upload it, because if you remember, I also mentioned Vital Capital that is looking at healthcare projects that are specific to the COVID response. Another philanthropic pool of capital that you might know of already is Bill and Melinda Gates. They created, in partnership with MasterCard, a fund that is a COVID fund relief. And you have already some African initiatives such as Alima that has been awarded grants to be able to provide an immediate response. So these are a few first ideas you can look at. The next question is regarding the impact of the crisis for startups in the ideation stage. So what is the strategy to raise money for your startup in early stage? So as I said earlier, beyond, let's say, the capital that is really specific to COVID response, we still have the traditional investors. So what you have to look at is based on where you are. Capital, it's like a value chain. You have several steps. So one first steps with low ticket size, but great awareness and, is amazing, it's actually African Business Heroes and NPI. Why? Because you can be part of a competition and then win a prize money. Last year, every finalist got 100,000 euros or more. So it's an exciting, first check to start with. And there are several contests to begin with. We can share also in our follow-up email. So that's number one. Number two is you also have acceleration, entities that are coming early, that are also coming with lower check size, and that will not ask you to have done, for instance, hypergrowth and further expansion. And these ones also are great people, because beyond the investment in capital, they will also, sometimes they come with readiness programs. So for instance, Orange has Orange Fab, which is an acceleration program, which is good because they give you access to, for instance, an office if you don't have one. They give you access to all APIs of Orange, and they also give you a prize money. Later, you have later, it's still early stage, let's say, but it could be higher ticket sizes. You have the angel networks. So you have several of them. Sometimes they are Pan-African, sometimes they are local. One, for instance, example of local angel network is, Lagos Angel Network or Cairo Angel Network. And don't think that Francophone or West African countries do not have. So for instance, in Senegal, there is one called DNA, Dakar Network Angel, and it's run by someone called Mariam Drop. You can find her on LinkedIn. And they are already actually doing today investments across West Africa with smaller ticket size. Then the next step is really
Fatoumata, because I am the timekeeper, I have to say thank you to everybody. Sorry for we have finished the time here.
I will wrap up. We will finish in 1 minute. It's 5:30, so we'll wrap up in 1 to 2 minutes. So two things. One is you can leverage a VC fund that are basically able to bring early stage capital on board, but also help you not only with money, but as operating partners. Janngo is one of them, Partech is one of them, Africa Invest is one of them. What I will propose from now is they did a great job, because there's only one question missing. So what we can do is to take the answer on another platform, such as our Medium account, and we will make sure, Sebastien, Antonia, Zahra, and myself, to send you a follow-up email with two contents that we promise. One is a list of all initiatives we've seen with immediate capacity to help you with funding for the COVID response. And two is the example of checklist to navigate through this crisis and make sure that you financially manage well and survive, thrive, and if not, hypergrowth for the crisis. So thanks a lot for your attendance. Thanks to the warriors who have stayed until the end. We have one last video that we will also post in the link so you can watch it fully, which is basically how to become an African business hero for those of you who are interested. So we will just showcase it right now. Thank you. Thank you again, everyone. We are done for the live part of the webinar. So please make sure to keep in touch through LinkedIn, Medium, and we'll be following up shortly by email. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Many thanks to everyone.